Fire in the Lake is the last chapter of the Coin series based on the counterinsurgency game system, a very ambitious game system, a game system that aims at reproducing the complexity of the messiest military events of recent times. Events where political factors, military factors, economic factors all influenced each other. Conflicts where no matter who you are in it, you're influenced by a system of forces which is of such complexity that you have limited agency, in which you have to deal with what you can, and that may not be as much as you want. So a perfect system for capturing historically messy conflicts. In this game, the designers tackle possibly the messiest conflict of the last half a century or so, which is the Vietnam War. The system is both tough to learn is not the right word. It does not allow manual. You can memorize most of the rules easily. It is tough to see through the trees and see the forest through the trees. It is a system that is economic in nature. If you think at the complexity of events that the system represents, it is miraculously lean. You could represent in great detail the war in Vietnam in a game with a 200-page rule manual. You could do that. It is much tougher to do that with a manual that only has a couple of pages, even though those pages are pretty dense. But once you memorize those rules, it takes a little bit before you become familiar with the mechanics behind the rules, with what you can do with the rules and how you can achieve certain objectives, how you can go anywhere using those rules. So because of this, I want to start the review by telling you about the basic mechanics of the counterinsurgency system, also covering the specific ways in which these mechanics are implemented in Fire in the Lake, and then I will tell you my impressions about the game Fire in the Lake specifically. The game is played on this nice looking mounted board where 4 factions will be fighting to pursue their objectives in Vietnam. The factions are divided in 2 counterinsurgent factions and 2 insurgent factions. The counterinsurgents are the Americans and the Republic of Vietnam, which is divided in army units and police units. The police units are orange. And then you have Northern Vietnam and the Southern Communists. These are the insurgents. The factions kind of go against each other, even though counterinsurgents will benefit from working together, and so will the insurgents. Ultimately, each player has a different set of goals. And there's a track around the board where you place markers that indicate the number of points that the players are earning and, well, how well they're doing. What is really nice is that the markers also remind you of the type of thing that you're trying to achieve, the resources that you're trying to gather to win the game. In order to win, the American player needs to score points by totaling together the number of available troops and bases and the number of support points. The Viet Cong score points based on the level of opposition that they create in the country and the number of bases that they have. The Republic of Vietnam will score points based on the population that is controlled by the counterinsurgents and by patronage, which is a value that will change throughout the game. And the Northern Vietnam player wins by controlling areas, so scores points based on population controlled by Northern Vietnam plus number of bases on the board. Units in the game are represented by wooden pieces. You have cubes that represent regular troops, and with the exception of orange cubes that represent police, you have bases which are represented by circular pieces, and those are important for victory conditions and other game functions. Very important, you have irregular troops, which are represented by cylinders, and they represent different things for different factions. For the insurgents, such as this one, the cylindrical troops represent guerrillas. For the American player, they represent the regular American-led troops, and these ones are the Rangers of the Republic of Vietnam. Troops represented by a cylinder have a star on one side and nothing on the other. That means that the unit can be inactive on the board with the side star down, or active with the star side up. Usually units need to be active for you to attack them, so there are actions that will make your units inactive, which pretty much is an abstraction to represent the fact that you don't know exactly where they are. They are in hiding, and then there are actions that allow you to activate them so you can find them and then you can attack them. And the mix of units changes vastly depending on the factions. For example, the Republic of Vietnam has police cubes and nobody else has, and the Viet Cong do not have troops. They only have bases and guerrillas, but they do have a lot of those. Now, this is a card-driven game. The flow of the game is regulated by cards coming from this deck. Yes and no. These are the cards that are available to build your deck. Not all the cards will be available during all of your games. Suppose that this is my deck for this game, these cards are not used at all. And since each time you will shuffle the cards before you randomly select the cards that go in the deck that you're going to use, the replay value for this game is off the charts. The games will just be vastly different from one another depending on the combination of cards that will form the main deck. I will say that this is the deck for this game that we want to demonstrate. Card-driven game, but not driven by cards that go in the player's hands. There will always be a card available on the table, which represents the one that is the card that is being resolved right now, and a card visible on top of the deck representing the card that will be resolved next. So you can always see a turn ahead and see what happens next. On the top of the card, you have symbols referring to the 4 factions in play, and the order in which the symbols are placed, and you read that from left to right, indicates the order in which players have a chance of doing something during their turn. Now, each faction has a marker that indicates whether the faction is eligible to take actions or ineligible. What happens is that usually you take an action, then your marker goes there, and the next turn you do not get to be eligible, you do not get to perform actions, then you become eligible again. That means that when you're going left to right and asking players if they want to perform an action, you will have to skip ineligible factions, and only up to 2 factions can activate in a single turn. When you activate, you can do one of several turns, or several things. You can choose to perform the event printed on the card, and you simply read the text and implement what the event says. Some cards have multiple events, then you choose which one you want to implement. Or you could choose to perform an operation and a special activity, or an operation with no special activity. Each player has a range of actions that they can perform. There are 2 groups of actions. Guess how they're called? Operations and special activities. So if you decide not to perform the event, you can perform your operation with or without a special activity. Now, what is interesting is that, as you see from this little diagram here, the action that the first active faction takes influences the options that are available to the second faction. So if there's a second faction activating later this turn on the same card, the second faction will have to take the option that results from the previous one. So if the first player performed an operation with no special activity, then the second faction to activate can only perform a limited operation, which is an operation with restrictions as to the areas that can be affected by the operation. If the first player decided to perform an operation and also resolve the special activity, then the second player can also take a limited operation or can perform the event. If the first player resolved the event on the card, then the second player that activates that turn can perform an operation, a regular operation, and can even add a special activity. Each faction in this game also has a pivotal card, a pivotal event card, and there's a change from previous games in the system. Each card lists a condition that needs to be made for the card to be played, but if you meet the condition you decide to play, then there is a special advantage that you can use and that you can perform by executing the text of your pivotal event card. There's also a special type of card in the deck. It is called the Coup. When that card is resolved, you perform a special round that has its own track. There are just so many steps in it that you have a marker to make sure that you know where you are and where you need to go next. Also, this is a very important section of the game, because this is pretty much when things come together, when things pay off or punish you. This is where you see the medium-term effect of the actions that you've taken in the previous phases of the game. First, you have a resources phase where the insurgent guerrillas get to sabotage lines of communication where they have an advantage over the counterinsurgents. You degrade the Ho Chi Minh Trail. The trail is represented by a track on the board, and the value on the track will change, and that will affect how things are going for the North Vietnamese. Then factions get some earnings. The Viet Cong and the North Vietnamese get some earnings, some resources. The resources received by the ARVN, by the Republic of Vietnam, are calculated in a more complicated way. There are more things that you need to take into account. You need to take into account aid. You need to take into account economy, which will be affected by the value of the lines of communications that have been sabotaged. And then the aid is reduced based on the number of casualties. Then you have the support phase, when players will try to affect the level of support on the board. The US and the ARVN will try to pacify areas. The insurgents prefer to agitate and to create opposition. Each area on the board can be in one of 5 states. It can be in active support of the government, in passive support, neutral, so there are no markers, passive opposition, or active opposition. And you have a marker on the board to indicate the state, and if there are no markers in a certain area, that means that the area is neutral. And you can spend resources in that phase to add and change markers in your favor, going towards the objective that you have, which is pacification for some players and agitation for other players. Units can be redeployed on the board. If the game is not over, the United States player gets to commit troops to the board. This is the main way in which the American player gets to bring in units. Units cannot be added to the board by the American player as easily as other factions can add units. And then you have a reset phase. You perform some tasks there to reset the situation, and you draw the next card. And you keep playing like that, and you keep resolving cards until one of the players emerges as the winner. As for the individual actions that the players can take, there are these excellent player aids that list all the actions available for each player, for each faction, and for each action you have a quick summary of the purpose, location where you can execute it, cost, and the procedure for that location. Viet Cong and North Vietnam have several actions that are in common, but then they have special activities, and also the counterinsurgents have certain actions which are in common, and those are the main operations, and then special activities are unique. Let's start from the Viet Cong. They can rally to augment or recover friendly forces, so you add new pieces to the board. You can march to move your units. You can attack. You need a good number of Viet Cong units to put together an attack that has a chance of succeeding. You need to roll a die. You lose Viet Cong troops when you're attacking. These guys are not great fighters. It's pretty expensive to use them in that force, but in that way. But they have other advantages. Stealthiness being one of them. The ability to create terror being another one. When you perform terror as your operation, in each selected space you activate an underground guerrilla, so you reveal your position by performing this, and then you can add a terror marker if there isn't one in the area, and that will make it harder to affect the situation of the region later, and you also shift one level towards active opposition. You may also need money, so you decide to tax people, which allows you to gain resources, but also people will not like you very much, and then you shift the level towards the support for the government. All of a sudden, you don't seem as attractive an option as you did just a moment before you taxed people. You can subvert, then you remove ARVN cubes and you can replace them, or you can replace them with a Viet Cong guerrilla. Ambush, it is just what it sounds. It is a swift, powerful attack. Insurgent operations are the same for the North Vietnamese as for the Viet Cong, but for the special activities, they can infiltrate NVA troops. They can bombard, which is a powerful attack using bombers, and you can ambush, which is an attack that is performed using guerrillas. Again, it's pretty much what it sounds it is. Then you have the actions of the counterinsurgents. Republic of Vietnam and United States can train, patrol, sweep, and assault. These actions are in common. Training adds troops to the board. Patrolling allows the player to move cubes along adjacent lines of communications or cities, stopping at insurgents, and then to activate guerrilla units. This is how you find them. Sweep is very similar, but it takes place into adjacent spaces. Again, you're moving to find and activate enemy guerrillas. And you can also assault, which is when you fight against the units of the opponent that you have been able to find. As for unique special actions, govern, then you're trying to obtain aid or patronage. You're pretty much gathering resources. Transport allows you to move units fast around the board. And raid. For each space, you move in any adjacent ranges desired. Then you can activate an underground ranger to remove enemy pieces. So you're using your rangers to launch powerful attacks, but then you're revealing yourself, and you also, but you're also inflicting damage on the opponent. Advice: this is when the United States player can do stuff using indigenous forces. You're pretty much maneuvering forces belonging to the ARVN player, or you're activating underground rangers or irregulars to perform actions. Airlift allows you to relocate units fast between 4 spaces on the board. And airstrike. It's powerful, it can reduce a lot, it can eliminate a lot of enemy pieces, up to 6 active enemy pieces, which can be troops, guerrillas, and then bases, but you shift each space where you are launching an airstrike 1 level towards active opposition. It is powerful against your enemies, but let's face it, the local population really does not like airstrikes. And why should they? The system, as I said earlier, is not hard to learn. It is hard to become fully familiar with. It is a little harder to figure out how to use the rules to your advantage, how to turn them into a strategy. It is possible that the first couple of rounds, if not most of the first game, inexperienced players will be running around in circles, going pretty much nowhere. But then you start seeing the order in which you should execute actions, the times in which you should try to be active, and the times in which it is okay to let other people go. The the deals that they can strike with other factions, the uneasy alliances that you will form, and when it is the right time to renege on your previous promises to your previous allies. All these things will come after a while that you play the game. So do not worry if at the beginning you feel cold about the game, you feel like the game is very procedural, you're just implementing procedures and not achieving a sense of gameplay. That will come, and when it comes, the payoff is big, because the payoff is that you will have the sense that indeed you are somehow miraculously grasping at events of gargantuan proportions, of colossal complexity, and yes, you are somehow interacting with them, you are somehow getting a sense of how they work, of the challenges they presented, in a system that works very well, it is very solid, and that it is much less than what it achieves in terms of complexity, of difficulty. As I said, yes, there's a certain difficulty, a certain learning curve, but what you get in return is so many times more than what you put in, that you feel definitely rewarded, you feel that period of self-training was not wasted at all. And if you think about the complexity, what you have here, the way in which the factions interacted historically, and what you can do here, starting from that set of rules, I can already tell you that to me, Fire the Lake is a pretty remarkable achievement. About the feel of the game, this may not be for everybody. If you read the comments online, I found something funny in them. The people that complain about the game, they talk about the frustration of the game. It's like, well, you were very hard to achieve very little, and then somebody takes that away from you very easily. Then you achieve another little thing, and they take it away. Then you manage to do something, and you lose it. That's so frustrating. And then you read the comments of people that like the game and they say, wow, the game is so frustrating. Yes, I mean, you achieve something and then you lose it. Then you do something else and they take it away from you. It's the same comments, but with a different spirit. The spirit is that of people that they realize that sense of frustration, that sense of very small steps toward your goal, and steps that in many cases will amount to nothing, is exactly what you should expect when we're talking about this war. It is exactly the type of feel that gives you an historical connection to the event. And if you are up for that, if you are in that mindset of seeing why that matters, why that is relevant, then you may find enjoyment even from that sense of frustration. And actually, if you were to just walk a straight, easy path through the jungles of Vietnam, I think that would be a big disservice to history. And to gameplay. I don't think that would make any sense. I mean, the frustration is good in certain cases. Team and frustration in a certain way, a certain type, and in certain amounts is perfectly reasonable to have in a game about a conflict like the one that is represented here. Compared to other titles in the system, this is a very strong one. This is most likely my favorite one. And the Abyss, I enjoyed mechanically, but the theme I wasn't just all that interested in. Distant Plane, I was much more interested in the theme, and I like that one. I think these are the two my favorite ones, Fire in the Lake and Distant Plane. The Cuban, the one about the Cuban Revolution, Cuba Libre, the map is so small, so different, presents nice challenges. There's a tightness in it, and that is nice, and it can work as an introductory game to the system. But I just feel the Fire in the Lake and Distant Plane are the best ones, and of the two, I slightly prefer this one, even though, I don't know, don't ask me exactly why. I don't know that I will be able to point that out entirely. I just feel that the cards seem to be more interesting, the challenges seem to be interesting, the small adjustments and changes to the system that you have here work well. I like the additions to the system, like the pivotal cards and other elements such as the track that the trail that the North Vietnamese have to deal with. There's more complexity. I think this is also the most complex in the game, in the system, the one with the highest amount of unique rules. But again, so doable if you're a serious player, serious gamer. So very enjoyable if you're in the right mindset. This is not a game that people are likely to say, yeah, it was kind of okay. This is a game that people are likely not to get at all, or not to appreciate, or to be strongly excited about. I personally am in the enthusiastic team. I find that Insurgency in Vietnam is the best implementation of the counterinsurgency system so far. Is a phenomenally engaging, detailed yet mechanic economic representation of a conflict of incredible complexity. It's an experience to play. It will take you certainly more than a game session if you play the full campaign game, and at the end you will be exhausted. You will need an ice pack on your head. It can be a little bit of a brain burner from time to time, a lot of a brain burner from time to time, but you will be happy. You will be happy that you had that experience. A game that gives you such an immersive experience, to me, is an achievement, and I believe that indeed Fire in the Lake is quite an achievement in this system and just in recent game design in general.